The ballroom was still. Not the peaceful kind of still. The kind that comes after something breaks, after a door slams, and the echo fades and the air forgets how to move. Westley Beaumont stood alone in the center of the room. Around him, the engagement party decorations held their positions like soldiers who had not yet received orders to stand down. White roses, gold candle holders, champagne flutes nobody touched. The candles had burned low. Wax dripped onto the tablecloths in slow, quiet trails. Priscilla had walked out 30 minutes ago. He was not crying. He was not shaking. He was standing very still, looking at the door on the far side of the room, the one that led to the kitchen hallway where Nadine stood. She was still in her uniform, hands folded in front of her. A phone held carefully between her fingers. She took one step toward him. "There is something you need to hear," she said quietly, "and something you need to know about me." He looked at the phone. Then he looked at her face, and something in her eyes, something old and tired and full of love, stopped him completely cold. He reached for the phone. "But before we go any further, if this is your first time here, welcome. And if you have been here before, welcome back. This channel is where real stories live. Stories about loyalty and betrayal. About the people who stay when everyone else walks away. About love that does not ask for recognition, and the moment the truth finally comes to light." If this kind of story moves, you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss what comes next. And before we begin, drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. We love knowing who is in this room with us. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Westley Beaumont was 34 years old, and by almost every measure the world used to keep score, he had won. He had grown up in Atlanta, not the polished, manicured version of the city that ended up in magazines, but the real version. The one with Saturday morning church services that ran 2 hours long. The one with front porches and neighbors who knew your grandmother's name. His father, Reginald Beaumont, had built a real estate empire from a single rental property on the south side of the city, and by the time Westley was old enough to understand what his father did for a living, Reginald's name was on office buildings, and his face was in the business section of the Atlanta Journal 3 times a year. Westley did not coast on that. He built something of his own, a technology firm called Elevate Solutions, specializing in cloud infrastructure for mid-size healthcare companies. He had started it at 27 with 2 laptops, a leased office the size of a large closet, and a business plan he had rewritten 11 times. By the time he was 32, Elevate Solutions had contracts with 43 healthcare networks across 9 states. He had done it with patience and precision, the same way his father had taught him to do everything quietly, thoroughly, and without needing anyone to applaud. He lived in the family estate in Buckhead, a large, graceful property set back from the street behind iron gates and old oak trees. The kind of house that did not announce itself. The kind that simply existed with a certain settled authority, the way old money tends to do. There were formal gardens along the east side, and a long back porch that looked out over the city at night. Reginald had loved that porch. After his father passed away 14 months ago now, Westley had sat out there many evenings alone, doing nothing except watching the lights and missing him. He had met Priscilla Vance 8 months after Reginald's passing at a charity gala for a children's literacy foundation downtown. She was stunning in a way that seemed almost architectural, everything precisely placed, nothing left to chance. She laughed at the right moments and asked thoughtful questions and remembered small details he mentioned in passing. She called him 2 days after the gala, not to ask him out, but to send him an article about something they had discussed, along with a single line. "Thought you might find this interesting. It was the most effective thing she could have done. He called her that same evening. What followed was 8 months of what felt from the inside like the real thing. She was present. She was warm in public and warmer in private. She seemed genuinely interested in his work. She spoke about the future the way people speak when they intend to be in it. He had proposed on the back porch, the same porch where he used to sit with his father. She had said yes before he finished the sentence. He had not yet understood what she was. Nadine Cross had worked in the Beaumont estate for 11 years. She was 52 years old, medium height, quiet in her movements with close-cropped natural hair that had gone mostly silver at the temples. She had a face that held things without showing them, the kind of face that comes from years of practice. She arrived every morning at 7 in the morning and moved through the house like water, finding every crack that needed filling, every surface that needed attention, every detail that had been overlooked. The house ran because of her. Most people in it had simply stopped noticing that. The rest of the household staff respected her without making a ceremony of it. The younger housekeepers came to her with questions. The groundskeeper left her the last of the good coffee. Nobody assigned her this authority. She had simply accumulated it over years of being the most reliable person in any room she entered. Priscilla noticed her on the second day and made an immediate assessment. Invisible, useful, beneath consideration. She called Nadine the help when speaking to her friends, always with a particular lightness in her voice that made it clear this was not carelessness, but intention. She left messes in rooms she knew Nadine would have to clean. She issued instructions in the tone of someone who had never once considered that the person receiving them might have a name. Westley saw this, and it bothered him. He had told Priscilla twice gently that Nadine had been with the family for over a decade and deserved basic respect. Priscilla had smiled and touched his arm and said, "Of course, absolutely, you are right." Then she continued exactly as before. He had filed this away somewhere in the back of his mind, not far enough back it turned out. What Westley did not see, what he had never stopped long enough to see, was Nadine's face when she looked at him. Not the careful professional expression she wore at work, the other one. The one that appeared in the half-second before she arranged herself. The one that surfaced when he walked into a room with his head down, clearly carrying something heavy. The one that looked, if you caught it fast enough, almost like the face of someone watching over a child they were not allowed to claim. He had never caught it fast enough. He thought of her as loyal staff, the most reliable person in the house. He appreciated her in the way people appreciate things they have stopped truly seeing, warmly, abstractly, without ever really looking. This was the one detail that would matter more than any other. 3 weeks before the engagement party on a Tuesday morning in early November, Reginald's personal attorney, Clifford Odom, called Westley's cell phone. Odom was a careful man who chose his words the way a surgeon chooses instruments, deliberately and never more than necessary. "Westley," he said, "your father left additional instructions. There is a clause in the will we have not yet discussed." Westley leaned back in his chair. "What kind of clause?" A brief pause on the line. "The kind," Odom said slowly, "that you need to hear before the wedding." Clifford Odom's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city like a long, quiet judgment. Westley had been in this office many times after his father's passing, during the estate transfer, during the paperwork that follows the end of a life. He knew the leather chairs and the smell of old books and the way Odom always poured 2 glasses of water before speaking, as if hydration were a form of preparation for difficult news. He poured 2 glasses now. Westley sat down and waited. "Your father was a careful man," Odom began. He set one glass in front of Westley and kept the other. "You know that better than anyone." He planned things far in advance. He thought about consequences before they happened. And he worried quietly, privately, in the way he did everything about the people who might come into your life after he was gone. Westley said nothing. He added a clause to his will approximately 2 years before his passing. Odom continued. He called it a loyalty assessment period. The language is precise on the first anniversary of his death. All liquid assets held in the Beaumont family trust are to be frozen for a period of 60 days. During that time, your accounts will reflect a near total loss of accessible funds. On paper, to anyone who looks, you will appear financially devastated. The room was very quiet. He wanted to see, Odom said simply, who would stay. Westley sat with that for a moment. His father had been gone for 14 months. The anniversary had passed 3 weeks ago, which meant the freeze had already begun. "My cards," Westley said. "Hortensio. Declined as of last Monday." Odom confirmed. "Your operating accounts for Elevate Solutions are unaffected. The clause was designed carefully to avoid genuine business damage. But your personal accounts, your credit lines, your visible financial profile, all frozen." Westley thought about the dinner 2 nights ago. He had reached for his card at the restaurant, and it had been declined. He had laughed it off, told Priscilla it was a banking error, switched to an older card he kept for emergencies. Priscilla had smiled and said these things happen, and squeezed his hand across the table. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Westley asked. "Your father asked me to wait until the freeze was already in effect. He did not want you to have time to prepare. He wanted your reaction and the reactions of the people around you to be genuine." Odom paused. "I am sorry if this feels like a violation of your trust. It was his instruction, and I was bound by it." Westley looked out the window at the city. He thought about his father on the back porch at night watching the lights. He thought about the particular kind of love that expresses itself through worry, the kind that builds safety nets in secret and never mentions them. He felt a complicated grief move through his chest. Not anger. Something older and softer than anger. "He was protecting me," Westley said. "He was trying to," Odom said. Westley made a decision in that moment. He would not tell Priscilla, not because he wanted to test her the way his father had intended, but because some part of him, a part he was not yet ready to examine directly, was quietly curious about what she would do. He went home. Nadine was in the hallway when he came through the front door, carrying a stack of freshly laundered linens toward the guest rooms. She glanced at him as he passed one of those brief professional acknowledgments that had been part of their daily rhythm for years. But this time she stopped. Not fully, not in a way anyone would notice. She slowed for just half a step, her eyes moving across his face with a speed and precision that suggested she was reading something there, something he had not yet spoken aloud. Then she continued down the hallway without a word. She had heard. The walls in old houses are thinner than people remember. Clifford Odom had called Westley's cell phone, but Westley had taken the call in the sitting room rather than his study, and Nadine had been in the adjacent linen closet, replacing the shelf paper in the cedar drawers. She had not been eavesdropping. She had simply been present the way she was always present, quietly, invisibly, doing the work of keeping a house in order. She had heard every word. She set the linens down on the guest room bed and stood very still for a moment, her hands resting on the folded fabric. She thought about the implications carefully. The money freeze, the test, Priscilla. She had known Priscilla for 8 months. She had watched her move through this house, the way a person moves through a space they are already redecorating in their mind. She had watched her eyes travel over the furniture, the artwork, the square footage. She had watched her calculate. Nadine walked back toward the kitchen. She passed the doorway of the small study where Westley was sitting alone, staring at nothing. She did not stop. But as she passed, she did something she had never done before. She reached out and gently, almost imperceptibly, pulled the study door until it was nearly closed. Not shut, nearly closed. So that whatever Westley was carrying in that room would have at least a small degree of shelter from the rest of the house. It was a tiny thing. It cost nothing. But it was the only form of protection she could offer him without breaking the silence she had kept for 11 years. That evening, Priscilla took a phone call in the upstairs bedroom with the door shut. Her voice was not loud, but the house had its acoustics, and Nadine, passing through the hallway below with an empty laundry basket, heard enough. 3 words, spoken in a low and careful tone. "Is it permanent?" Nadine stopped walking. She stood at the bottom of the staircase with the empty basket in her hands and listened to the silence that followed the pause of someone receiving an answer. And then Priscilla's voice, again quieter now. "I need to know before I make any decisions." Nadine set the basket down. She reached into her apron pocket and took out her phone. Her hands were steady. Her face was steady. Only her eyes moved one slow blink, the kind that comes before a decision that has already been made. She opened the voice recording application, and she pressed record. 2 weeks passed. The world has a way of talking without anyone opening their mouth. Word moved through Atlanta's business circles, the way word always moves in those circles, through glances at charity events, through pauses before someone's name is mentioned, through the particular quality of silence that follows, when a man who was once considered untouchable suddenly appears to be touchable after all. Westley had not announced anything. He had not told a single person about the freeze, but Priscilla had been having lunches, long ones, with people whose names Westley recognized, social connections, event organizers, the kind of women who moved through the city's upper tier like weather systems, carrying information from one place to another without ever appearing to do so intentionally. He noticed the lunches because Priscilla mentioned them in passing, the way people mention things they want you to register as normal. She was always home by 5 in the afternoon. She was always warm when she returned. She always kissed him on the cheek and asked how his day had been, but something had shifted in the temperature between them. Small things. The way she checked her phone more often when they were in the same room. The way she answered questions about the future, the wedding venue, the honeymoon plans, with a brightness that felt slightly rehearsed. The way she had stopped initiating conversations about the life they were going to build together and had instead become very focused on the life they were currently living, as if she was performing a detailed inventory. Westley noticed. He said nothing. The shift in her behavior toward Nadine was less subtle. Before the freeze, Priscilla had been dismissive of Nadine in the quiet architectural way of someone who has simply decided another person does not fully exist. After the freeze, the dismissiveness acquired an edge. As if Priscilla, feeling the ground become uncertain beneath her, needed somewhere to place the pressure, and Nadine was the safest available surface. She began giving instructions in front of guests. Not requests. Instructions delivered in the tone of someone establishing a hierarchy for an audience. "Nadine, I need this cleared before people arrive. Nadine, these glasses are not polished properly. Nadine, please try to move more quietly when we have company." The household staff heard all of it. They exchanged glances in the kitchen afterward, the kind of glances that contain entire conversations. On a Wednesday afternoon, Priscilla's friend Tamara came for lunch. Tamara was tall and sharp-eyed with the particular energy of someone who thrives on knowing things before other people do. Nadine served them in the sunroom, a Caesar salad, sparkling water, the small sourdough rolls Priscilla always requested. She set the plates down with precision and stepped back toward the wall. She was invisible to them. She had always been invisible to them. She had learned long ago that invisibility in certain rooms was not a diminishment. It was information. Things seemed different, Tamara said, keeping her voice light in the way of someone asking a serious question with plausible deniability. Priscilla lifted her fork. Different how? I don't know. You tell me. A pause, the kind with weight in it. There have been some complications, Priscilla said. Financial things. I don't have the full picture yet. How complicated? Complicated enough that I'm paying attention. Priscilla took a careful sip of sparkling water. I'm not panicking. I'm just being smart. And if it doesn't resolve, Priscilla set her glass down with a precise, quiet click. Then I make decisions accordingly. I have options, Tamara. I have always had options. Tamara nodded slowly. You deserve someone stable. Everyone deserves stability, Priscilla said pleasantly. Nadine carried the empty breadbasket back to the kitchen. She set it on the counter beside the sink. She stood there for a moment with her back to the room, looking at the wall above the window where she had taped a small photograph 6 years ago, a photograph she had brought from home of a garden she had once kept. She looked at it whenever she needed a moment to remember herself. Her hands were not shaking. But something behind her eyes was. This was not new information. She had suspected this about Priscilla from the 3rd month. But suspicion was not the same as hearing it said aloud over Caesar salad in the sunroom, hearing the word options dropped into a conversation like a coin into a jar. Hearing it said about a man who had no idea the woman sitting in his house was already calculating the distance to the exit. She thought about Westley. She thought about the note she had left him 2 nights ago, his favorite meal on the counter, a small folded paper beside it. Eat something. You need your strength. She had almost not left the note. It was closer to the line than she usually allowed herself, but she had watched him come home that evening, with his shoulders carrying something invisible and heavy, and the part of her that had no professional designation, the part that had been present since before he was born, had acted before the careful part could stop it. He had stood at the counter for a long time holding the note. She had watched from the hallway. She had told herself to go back to the kitchen. She had not moved. Now standing at the sink, she dried her hands on the kitchen towel and reached into her apron pocket. The recording application was still open. She pressed the button again and slid the phone back into her pocket. That same evening, after Tamara had gone and dinner had been served and cleared, Westley sat alone in the study with the lights low. Nadine passed the doorway on her way to close up the kitchen for the night. She slowed. He was staring at his laptop screen. On it, half visible from the doorway, were 2 words in the search bar, words he had not yet finished typing, as if he had stopped himself mid-thought. Vantage Soul Nadine looked at those 2 words. Her jaw tightened by a fraction. Then Wesley's eyes came up and found her in the doorway. They looked at each other for a moment that lasted slightly longer than professional courtesy required. "Good night, Nadine," he said quietly. "Good night," she said. And then, because she could not stop it, "Lock your laptop when you step away from it, Westley. Even at home." He went very still. She walked back to the kitchen without looking behind her. She had never called him by his first name before. Not once. In 11 years. The name stayed with him. Vantage Solutions. Westley had first encountered it 3 months ago, a passing reference in an industry newsletter about aggressive data acquisition in the healthcare infrastructure space. At the time, he had noted it the way you note weather on a day you are not going outside. Relevant, perhaps. Not urgent. He searched it properly now. Vantage Solutions was a Chicago-based firm, 4 years old, privately funded, with a growth trajectory that did not match its stated client base. They had entered 12 new markets in 18 months. They were undercutting established players on pricing in ways that suggested they already knew the cost structures of those players before entering. 3 separate industry contacts had mentioned data irregularities in the past quarter, proprietary information appearing in competitor proposals, internal processes, showing up in outside presentations. The pattern was unmistakable if you knew what you were looking at. Someone was feeding them information. Someone with access to the interior workings of companies like Elevate Solutions. Someone close enough to the source to know not just the products, but the architecture behind them, the pricing logic, the contract terms, the client onboarding processes that took years to develop and refine. Westley sat with this for a long time. Then he called Clifford Odom. Not about the will, not about the freeze. He asked Odom to connect him quietly with the cybersecurity firm Elevate Solutions, used for compliance auditing, a small, precise operation run by a woman named Bernadette Cole, who had spent 12 years at a federal agency before going private. He asked Bernadette to run a discrete access audit on the company's shared cloud files. He wanted to know who had accessed what and when and from which devices. He asked her to call him directly, on his cell phone, not his office line. He went to dinner with Priscilla that evening. She was lovely. She talked about the engagement party now 2 weeks away. She talked about the florist and the caterer and the playlist and whether they should do a receiving line or let the evening flow more naturally. She reached across the table and touched the back of his hand when she laughed. She looked at him with warm, steady eyes. He smiled at everything she said. He tasted nothing he ate. Bernadette called the following morning at 8 in the morning. "You have a problem," she said without preamble. The secondary login credentials attached to a guest access account on the shared cloud server had been used 7 times in the past 18 days. The account had been created 14 months ago, shortly after Reginald's passing, during the period when Westley had been managing estate matters and had temporarily expanded access to the household network for administrative convenience. It had never been properly closed. The device associated with those logins was a tablet registered to a personal account. Bernadette read him the account name. He asked her to repeat it. She did. He set the phone down on the desk and looked at the wall for a long time. The morning light came through the window at a low angle and fell across the floor in a long, pale stripe. He watched it without seeing it. He thought about Priscilla's voice on the phone the night the freeze began. Is it permanent? He thought about the word options dropped casually over lunch with Tamara, while Nadine cleared the bread. He thought about the way she touched his hand at dinner last night, warm and steady and entirely present. He thought about what it would take to perform that kind of warmth while simultaneously doing what she had been doing. He understood in that moment that some people are very good at the performance, that the warmth and the calculation were not contradictions in Priscilla's case. They were both real, both deliberate, both completely in service of the same goal. He called Odom again, told him what Bernadette had found. Odom was quiet for a moment, then methodical, walked Westley through the legal exposure, the options for response, the timeline. There was enough for a formal complaint. There was enough potentially for criminal charges, but it had to be handled carefully. Publicly accusing someone of corporate data theft required airtight documentation. Moving too fast would give her time to cover the trail. They agreed to wait until the engagement party. Let her believe everything was still in motion. Let her feel secure enough to make one more move. Westley spent the rest of the day in back-to-back calls with his operations team, voice even mind split cleanly in two. The professional half handled the work. The other half, the half that had proposed on his father's back porch, the half that had meant every word quietly finished, grieving something that he was only now understanding, had never been what he thought it was. That evening, Nadine served dinner for two. She moved through the dining room with her usual efficiency, setting plates, refilling glasses, stepping back to the margin of the room. Priscilla was talking about table arrangements for the party. Westley was nodding in the right places. As Nadine gathered the soup bowls to return to the kitchen, she passed behind Westley's chair. She slowed almost imperceptibly the way she had been slowing near him for 11 years, adjusting her orbit to his without either of them ever naming it. She placed the bowls on her tray. Her eyes met his for half a second. In that half second, something passed between them that had no professional name. He had seen something in her face over these past weeks, a vigilance, a guardedness on his behalf that went beyond job description. The note on the counter, the warning about his laptop, the way she had called him by his first name and then walked away as if she hadn't. He looked at her now with different eyes than he had used before. She held his gaze for exactly as long as she allowed herself. Then she picked up the tray and walked back toward the kitchen. An hour later, after Priscilla had gone upstairs, there was a quiet knock on the study door. Nadine stood in the doorway. No tray, no professional pretext, just herself in her uniform holding her phone in both hands. "I have something you need to hear," she said. Her voice was low and very steady. She played him the recording. Priscilla's voice filled the small room. "I need another week. The files are large. I'll deliver everything before I end things with him." The silence afterward was total. Westley sat without moving for a long moment. Then he looked up at Nadine. She met his eyes. Her expression was the most unguarded he had ever seen it. "There is more," she said quietly. "But before I give it to you—" She stopped, swallowed once. "I need to tell you who I am." She reached into her apron pocket with one hand and placed a folded document on the desk in front of him. He looked down. It was a birth certificate, and his name was on it. The document sat on the desk between them, like something alive. Westley did not reach for it immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something you already know will change the shape of everything with the particular stillness that comes just before. The room was quiet. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Upstairs, a floorboard shifted under the weight of someone moving through the bedroom. Priscilla, still in the house, still unaware. He picked up the birth certificate. His full name was there. Westley Reginald Beaumont. His date of birth, the hospital in Atlanta where he had been born. The line for the father's name was blank, but the line for the mother's name, he read it twice. Nadine Eloise Cross. He set the document down very carefully, as if it were made of something that could shatter. He did not speak. His chest had done something complicated, tightened and then expanded in a way that felt less like breathing and more like a door being forced open from the inside. He looked up at her. Nadine stood exactly where she had been standing. She had not moved. Her hands were folded in front of her, now the phone gone back into her pocket. Her face was open in a way he had never seen it, all the careful professional arrangement stripped away, leaving something underneath that was raw and old and exhausted from the weight of being carried so long in silence. Her eyes were full of tears she was not allowing to fall. "Say something," he said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. "I was 17, she said. "I was 17 years old and I had nothing. No family who would help me, no money, no way to give you what you deserved." She paused. "Your father, Reginald, he was a young attorney then. He handled the private adoption. He was kind about it. Kinder than he needed to be. Another pause. I signed the papers because I believed you would have a better life. Because I knew I could not give you one. Not then. Westley was very still. I never stopped looking for you, she said. It took me years. Adoption records were sealed. I had very little to go on. But I found you. Her voice dropped. You were 26. You had just started Elevate Solutions. You were in a newspaper photograph standing outside the office building you had leased, smiling. She stopped for a moment. You looked like you were going to be all right. You could have come to me, he said. I know. Why didn't you? She was quiet for long enough that the silence had texture. Because I was afraid, she said finally. I was afraid you would look at me the way people look at someone who waited too long. I was afraid you would ask why I came now when you had already become someone without me. I was afraid the answer would be that I was too late. She looked at him directly. So I applied for the housekeeping position instead. Just to be near you. Just to see that you were safe. He stood up from the chair. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the dark garden. The city lights glowed amber and gold in the distance. His hands were at his sides and they were shaking, not violently, but the deep interior kind of shaking that starts in the chest and moves outward. 11 years. She had made his coffee every morning for 11 years. She had kept the house that had been his father's house, and his grandfather's before that. She had left a note on the counter when she saw him struggling. She had called his name, his first name, just once, as a warning she could not stop herself from giving. She had stood in hallways and doorways and the margins of rooms and watched over him with a devotion that had no job title and required no acknowledgement, and asked for nothing in return. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass of the window. Did my father know? He asked. His voice was rough now, stripped of its usual composure. He found out, she said. About 4 years after I started working here. He ran a background check. He was thorough about everyone on the household staff. He found the birth records. A pause. He called me into his study. I thought he was going to let me go. What did he do? He asked me one question, Nadine said. He asked if I was here to disrupt your life or to protect it. She stopped. I told him the truth. I told him I only wanted to be close enough to know you were all right, that I would never say a word unless you needed me to. The tears came now. Not many, just enough. He sat with that for a long time. She continued. Then he said that a mother who would give up everything to keep her child safe and then spend years simply watching from a distance to make sure he stayed that way was not someone he was willing to remove from this house. Westley's breath left him in a single, slow exhale. He gave me a raise the following week, Nadine said softly. He never mentioned it again. The clock ticked. The city glowed outside the window. Westley turned around. His face was open and undone in a way that 34 years of composure had never allowed before. His eyes were red. He was not crying yet, but he was very close to it, standing at the exact edge of it, the way you stand at the edge of water before you decide to go in. He looked at her, really looked at her maybe for the first time, and found the face of a woman who had loved him longer than anyone still living. 11 years, he said. You were here for 11 years, and I never... He stopped. I never really looked at you. I know, she said. And there was no accusation in it, only the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had made peace with being unseen, because being unseen meant being allowed to stay. He crossed the room in 3 steps. He did not reach for her hand. He did not speak. He simply stood in front of her, closed the way you stand close to something you are only now understanding you almost lost, and let the weight of 11 years sit in the air between them without trying to fill it with words. Above them, a door opened upstairs. Priscilla's footsteps moved across the ceiling toward the staircase. Westley straightened. His face rearranged itself not into coldness, but into the particular calm of someone who has just decided exactly what they are going to do. "We end this tomorrow," he said quietly. Nadine nodded once, and just before she stepped back toward the kitchen, he said low and unplanned, almost to himself, "I made your coffee wrong for 11 years, didn't I?" She stopped walking. A sound came from her half-breath, half something else entirely. When she turned her head, there were tears on her face and the beginning of a smile. "Every single morning," she said. The engagement party began at 7 in the evening. By 7:30, the ballroom was full. Atlanta had turned out in its finest, the kind of crowd that arrives already performing, already aware of being seen. Women in gowns that cost what some people earned in a month. Men in tailored suits who shook hands with the confidence of people who had never once doubted their place in a room. Champagne moved through the space on silver trays. The florist had done something extraordinary with white roses and trailing greenery that made the whole room feel like the inside of a garden that had agreed to be formal for the evening. Priscilla was radiant. There was no other word for it. She wore a deep burgundy gown that moved when she moved, and her hair was pinned up with the kind of casual precision that takes considerable effort to achieve. She greeted every guest by name, remembered details about their lives, laughed in exactly the right proportions. She touched Westley's arm when she introduced him. She leaned into his shoulder when someone made a toast. She looked from every angle in the room like a woman completely certain of her future. Westley played his part. He was gracious and warm and present. He thanked people for coming. He accepted congratulations with a smile that reached his eyes just far enough to be convincing. He held Priscilla's hand when she offered it. He had been preparing for this evening for 24 hours, and he was prepared. Inside, he was made of glass. Nadine worked the room. She moved between guests with practiced invisibility, refilling champagne flutes, replacing empty appetizer plates, clearing glasses from surfaces before they became inconvenient. She had worn her uniform with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything. Her face was composed. Her movements were unhurried. To everyone in that room, she was simply part of the evening's machinery, present, the way the lighting was present, the way the music was present, noticed only when absent. Priscilla walked past her twice without acknowledgement. The third time she stopped. A guest. A woman named Sonia, the wife of one of Westley's earliest business partners, was standing nearby when Priscilla turned to Nadine with a champagne flute extended, and said in a tone pitched for the surrounding air, "These glasses are collecting fingerprints. Please be more careful. We have important people here tonight." Nadine took the glass. "Yes, ma'am." "And try to move more efficiently. You're creating bottlenecks near the entrance." Sonia, who was 61 years old and had raised 4 children and attended enough social events to recognize cruelty when it wore good manners, looked at Priscilla with an expression that did not yet announce itself, but was clearly forming an opinion. "That seemed unnecessary," Sonia said quietly after Nadine had moved away. Priscilla smiled at her with the full warmth of someone who has never once been told they were wrong. "I just have high standards," she said pleasantly. "It keeps the evening running well." Sonia said nothing further, but she did not return Priscilla's smile. Nadine carried the glass back toward the kitchen. She set it on the tray beside the others. She stood at the kitchen counter for 4 seconds. She counted them the way she had learned to count, in difficult moments, a small private practice of steadiness. And then she picked up a fresh tray and walked back out. At 8:45 in the evening, Clifford Odom arrived. He came through the main entrance with 2 people Westley had never met, a man and a woman, both in dark, unremarkable clothing that announced nothing. Odom was in a suit. He did not look like a party guest. He looked like what he was, a careful man who had come to do something specific. Priscilla saw him from across the room. Her smile did not disappear. But something behind it shifted, a fractional tightening, a microsecond of recalibration, visible only to someone who had been watching her carefully. Westley had been watching her carefully all evening. He saw it. He set down his champagne glass. He moved to the center of the room near the small raised platform where the musicians had been set up. He touched the shoulder of the nearest musician, who understood and brought the music to a natural close. The room settled into the attentive quiet of guests who sense something is about to be said. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Westley began. His voice was even and clear, carrying easily through the room. "This is an evening I have been looking forward to for some time, and I want to make sure that before it goes any further, I share something important." Priscilla moved to his side. Her hand found his arm. Her smile was perfect. "Some of you know that I have been navigating some financial complications recently," Westley continued. "Accounts frozen, some uncertainty about the business picture. I know the word got around." A small, knowing ripple of acknowledgement moved through the crowd. "I want to address that directly, and I want to address something else, something I discovered this week that I think everyone in this room deserves to know." He looked at Priscilla. She met his eyes with an expression of practiced concern and solidarity, the face of a woman standing by her man. He stepped away from her and nodded toward the room's audio system. The recording played through the speakers. Priscilla's voice, clear, unhurried, entirely herself, filled the ballroom. "I need another week. The files are large. I'll deliver everything before I end things with him." The room went absolutely still. Not the polite stillness of people being attentive. The deep, airless stillness of people who have just heard something they cannot unhear and are waiting to understand what it means. Priscilla's face went through several things in rapid succession. Shock, then a fast, controlled recovery. Then the particular expression of someone who has decided that offense is the better position. She laughed. It was a short, bright, social laugh, the kind deployed to signal that whatever just happened is smaller than it appears. "Westley," she said, her voice warm and slightly concerned, as if addressing someone who had made an embarrassing error in public. "That is completely out of context. You have been under an enormous amount of stress, sweetheart. I think, Priscilla," his voice was quiet, not loud, not angry, just quiet in a way that closed a door. She stopped. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that contained no heat whatsoever, no anger, no grief, no residue of what they had been to each other. Just clarity, the particular clarity of someone who has finished deciding. Then he turned to the room. "The woman who recorded that conversation," he said, his voice steady and carrying, "has worked in this house for 11 years. She was dismissed by many people in this room tonight as invisible, as unimportant." He paused. "She is the person who protected this family when no one else did." He found Nadine across the room. She was standing near the kitchen doorway, tray in hand, utterly still. "That woman," he said, and his voice changed something underneath it, shifting something that had been held for 24 hours, finally releasing, "is my mother." The silence that followed was the most complete silence the room had ever produced. Priscilla's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The silence held for a long moment. Then the room exhaled, not in words, but in the collective sound of people shifting, turning, recalibrating. Heads moved toward Nadine, toward Priscilla, back to Westley. The room was doing the math in real time, running backward through everything it had witnessed this evening. The dismissal at the champagne flute, the comment about bottlenecks, the smile that had never quite included the woman in the uniform, and arriving at conclusions that landed with the particular weight of things that should have been obvious sooner. Nadine had not moved. She stood in the doorway between the ballroom and the kitchen hallway, the tray still in her hands, her face completely still. Not frozen, still the way deep water is still. The way something is still when it has decided not to be moved by the surface. Her eyes found Westley across the room. He looked back at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Open, unguarded, publicly claiming something he had only learned 24 hours ago, with the full weight of a man who intended to keep it. She set the tray down on the nearest surface. Clifford Odom stepped forward. He moved with the unhurried precision of a man who has been waiting for his moment and has no interest in drama beyond what the facts themselves provide. He opened the leather portfolio he was carrying and addressed the room in his measured, deliberate voice. "My name is Clifford Odom. I am the personal attorney for the Beaumont family estate. What I am presenting tonight is documentation authenticated by my office and by an independent cybersecurity firm retained by Elevate Solutions." He removed a set of documents and held them with both hands. The first item is a birth certificate original copy establishing the biological relationship between Westley Reginald Beaumont and Nadine Eloise Cross. He paused. The second is a forensic access report showing that a tablet device registered to Priscilla Vance accessed proprietary cloud files belonging to Elevate Solutions on 7 separate occasions over the past 18 days. The files accessed include client contract architecture, proprietary pricing structures, and internal onboarding protocols. Another pause. The third item is a communication log showing contact between that same device and a representative of Vantage Solutions, a direct competitor of Elevate Solutions, during the same period. He closed the portfolio. "The documentation has already been submitted to the appropriate authorities," he said simply. "This is a courtesy notification." The room was very quiet. Priscilla had been standing with her champagne flute in her hand throughout Odom's presentation. At some point during it, without appearing to notice, she had gripped the stem hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale. She set the glass down now on a nearby table carefully and straightened to her full height. She looked at Odom, then at Westley, then slowly at the room, sweeping it, the way she always swept rooms, reading it, assessing it, looking for the angle that still worked. There was no angle. She pivoted to the only remaining option, which was emotion. "Westley." Her voice broke on the first syllable beautifully, precisely the way a professional musician hits a note. She moved toward him. "You have to listen to me. You have to let me explain. Those files, I was frightened. When I thought the money was gone, when I thought everything was falling apart, I panicked. I made a terrible decision. But it was fear, Westley. It was fear, not malice. I love you. I have always... Stop." His voice was not loud. It was simply final. She stopped. "I heard you on the phone the night the freeze began," he said. "Before I found the access logs, before I knew about the files." He looked at her steadily. "You were already calculating. It wasn't panic. It was a plan." Her expression shifted just slightly, just enough, and in that shift was the first truly unperformed thing she had shown all evening. Not remorse, something harder and more honest than remorse. The recognition of someone who has been seen clearly for the first time and does not entirely know what to do with that. She turned, and she looked at Nadine. Something moved through her expression, not the social warmth, not the calculation, not the performance. Something that might have been in another version of this woman the beginning of shame. "You," she said. Her voice had dropped. The beauty pageant warmth was gone. What remained was stripped and direct and uglier and more real. "You ruined this. You have been here for 11 years cleaning floors, and you think that makes you what exactly? You are a maid. You were always just a maid. And you took everything." Nadine looked at her. She did not raise her voice. She did not move from where she stood. She simply looked at Priscilla with the calm of a woman who has been called nothing for 11 years, and decided somewhere along the way that the word said more about the person using it than the person it was aimed at. She said nothing. The silence was more devastating than anything she could have said. Westley stepped between them. "Don't speak to her again." 3 words. Quiet as the first 3 had been, carrying the same absolute quality. Priscilla looked at him. For one long moment, something genuine passed across her face, something that might have been the shadow of real feeling, real loss, the recognition of what she was losing and what she had done to lose it. It was the most human she had looked all evening. Then it passed. Sonia, who had been standing 12 feet away since the recording played, spoke into the silence. Her voice was unhurried and carried the authority of someone who has earned the right to be heard in any room. "I am a data security attorney," she said, addressing no one in particular and everyone simultaneously. "I reviewed this documentation when Clifford contacted me 3 days ago. It is thorough, it is damning, and it will hold." She looked at Priscilla without expression. "I would recommend against making this more complicated than it already is." Priscilla looked at Sonia, at Odom, at the 2 people in dark clothing who had positioned themselves with quiet efficiency near the room's main exit. She picked up her evening bag from the table where she had set it at the beginning of the evening. She smoothed the front of her burgundy gown. She lifted her chin in the manner of someone performing dignity they no longer possess. She walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. She turned back one final time, not to Westley, not to Odom, not to the room full of people who would spend the next several weeks dissecting this evening in careful detail. She looked at Nadine. And in that look, just for a second, just long enough to be real, was the first genuine acknowledgement Priscilla Vance had ever given her. Not an apology, not remorse, but recognition. The reluctant, irreversible recognition of someone who had underestimated the wrong person and knew it, and would have to carry that knowledge forward. Then she walked through the door. The room exhaled again, a long collective release. Westley stood where he was for a moment. Then he walked across the ballroom, past the white roses and the gold candle holders, and the guests who parted quietly to let him through, past the champagne flutes and the trailing greenery and all the careful architecture of an evening that had become something entirely different from what it was designed to be. He walked to Nadine. He reached out and took her hand. Not a formal handshake, not a professional acknowledgement. Just his hand finding hers and holding it the way you hold something you have just realized you almost let slip through your fingers without ever knowing what it was. She looked up at him. Her eyes were full. He held her hand and said nothing for a long moment. Then very quietly, "I made your coffee wrong for 11 years, didn't I?" She made a sound that was half breath and half something that had been waiting 11 years for permission to exist. "Every single morning," she whispered. Nobody spoke. The room let them have it. Then Odom cleared his throat gently. "There is one more item," he said, "from your father's will. A final instruction he asked to be read only after this night." He looked at Westley. He was very specific about the timing. He held up a sealed envelope. On the front, in Reginald Beaumont's unmistakable handwriting, was Nadine's name. And beneath it, one line: "For the day my son finally knows." The envelope sat on the side table in the small sitting room off the main hallway. Westley had asked the guests to enjoy the remainder of the evening. The caterers would stay. The bar was open. The night did not need to end on account of what had happened. Most people stayed. Some left. Sonia stayed, and so did a handful of others who had been in Westley's life long enough to have earned the right to be nearby without intruding. Westley and Nadine sat in the small sitting room with the door closed. Odom placed the envelope on the table between them and then stepped back toward the door. "I'll give you privacy," he said. "I'll be just outside if you need me." The door closed behind him. The room was small and quietly furnished: a settee, 2 chairs, a lamp with a warm amber shade that Nadine had replaced the bulb in 3 times over the years, without anyone ever noticing. A narrow bookcase held a row of Reginald's old law journals. A framed photograph on the wall showed the estate in an earlier decade, the oak trees younger and thinner, the iron gates newly installed. Nadine looked at the envelope. Her name in Reginald's handwriting. Careful, upright letters, the hand of a man who had written legal documents for 40 years and treated every word on every page as something that mattered. "Do you want me to open it?" Westley asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "We can wait." "No." She reached for it. "I have been waiting long enough for things." She opened it carefully, working her thumbnail along the sealed edge with the same patience she brought to everything. Inside was a single folded page and a photograph face down. She unfolded the page first. It was handwritten. Both sides. Reginald's script, smaller than his formal hand, the kind of writing that happens when someone has a great deal to say and is trying to say it honestly rather than impressively. She read it silently. Westley watched her face. He watched her jaw tighten and then release. He watched her eyes move quickly across the first few lines, and then slow down the way you slow down when the words need to be felt as well as understood. He watched her press her lips together once. He watched a tear track down her left cheek without her making any move to stop it. When she finished, she folded the page once and held it in her lap. "Read it," Westley said gently. She looked at him for a moment. Then she unfolded the page and began. Reginald had written Nadine. "If you are reading this, then my son knows the truth, and the evening I planned for has finally come. I want to tell you what I could not say while I was living, because I was a proud man, and pride has a way of making cowards of us all. When I found out who you were, I was angry at first. I want to be honest about that. I thought you had come here under false pretenses. I thought you were a disruption waiting to happen. I sat across from you in my study, and I asked you one question, and you answered it without hesitation and without asking for anything in return. And I understood then that I was wrong about you. I watched you for 3 years after that conversation. I watched the way you cared for this house and for my son. I watched you leave food on the counter when he forgot to eat. I watched you close doors quietly when he needed shelter. I watched you stand in hallways and doorways and say nothing, ask for nothing, take nothing, only give. I kept her close because I knew she would keep you safe. I am not a man who finds apology easy. But I want to say this plainly: I am sorry I was not brave enough to tell him sooner. I am sorry I let you carry this alone for so long. You gave him up so he could have a life, and then you spent 11 years making sure that life stayed intact. There is no adequate word for what that is. There is only gratitude and the hope that he will give you what you were never able to give yourself permission to stop standing in the doorway and come fully into the room. Forgive me. Love the people who show up quietly. Reginald Westley had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of it. When Nadine finished reading, she folded the page again. Her hands were not entirely steady. She held the folded letter in both hands and looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at something that has just handed you back a piece of yourself you had stopped expecting to recover. He knew, Westley said. His voice was rough. He knew all of it, and he stopped, pressed his hand over his eyes. He should have told me. Yes, Nadine said simply. He should have. I'm sorry he didn't. So am I. She paused. But he kept me close. He kept me safe in his way. That was more than I expected. Westley lowered his hand. His face was undone fully completely, without any of the composure he had maintained through the entire evening. The crying that came now was the kind that has been held for a long time. Not elegant, not quiet. The real kind, the kind that shakes the shoulders and closes the throat and has no interest in being witnessed gracefully. Nadine put her arms around him. She held him the way you hold someone when you are finally, after a very long time, allowed to. He let her. Outside the small sitting room, the party wound down in the way that parties do after something real has happened. In the middle of them, people spoke in lower voices, stayed closer together, were kinder to each other in the indefinable way that witnessing something true tends to produce. In the kitchen, the young housekeeper, who had once had a tray, knocked from her hands by Priscilla without apology, stood at the sink washing glasses. When the head caterer told her quietly what had happened, who Nadine was, what the letter had said, she set the glass down and cried without entirely understanding why, except that sometimes justice arrives in a form that reaches further than the specific people it was meant for. Priscilla's consequences arrived without ceremony the way most consequences do. The formal complaint filed by Odom and Bernadette moved through the appropriate channels with the efficiency of documentation that leaves no room for interpretation. Within 72 hours, the story had reached the edges of Atlanta's business community. Within a week, it had traveled further. Vantage Solutions released a statement distancing themselves from the matter entirely. The representative Priscilla had been in contact with was placed on administrative leave. The contracts Priscilla had been building through her consulting work, the professional infrastructure she had been quietly assembling as an exit strategy, evaporated. The people who had laughed at Nadine over champagne sent no messages of support. The options she had mentioned to Tamara over lunch turned out to be considerably fewer than she had calculated. She retained a private attorney. She cooperated with the investigation to the degree that cooperation served her own interests. The criminal exposure was significant enough that cooperation was. Her attorney explained the only reasonable path. The social world that had embraced her because of her proximity to Westley Beaumont regarded her absence the way that world regards all absences, briefly, then not at all. That evening, when the last guests had gone and the catering team had cleared the ballroom and the white roses had been gathered into boxes to be donated to a hospital the following morning, Westley found Nadine on the back porch. She was standing at the railing, looking out at the city lights. She had changed out of her uniform. She was wearing her own clothes, a simple dark blouse, quiet slacks, and she looked standing there in her own clothes in the amber light of the porch, like a woman who had just been given permission to exist in a space she had been orbiting for 11 years. He came and stood beside her. They looked at the city together for a while without speaking. Then Nadine reached into the pocket of her slacks and produced the photograph that had been in the envelope, the one she had turned face down, before reading the letter, the one she had not yet looked at. She turned it over now, It was a photograph of herself at 17, young, exhausted, radiant in the complicated way of people who are simultaneously devastated and full of love. She was in a hospital bed. She was holding a newborn. She stared at it for a long time. "He kept it," she said, barely above a whisper. "All those years," Westley said. She nodded slowly. Her thumb moved across the edge of the photograph, not touching the image itself, just the border of it, just the edge of that old moment. "Your father," she said quietly, "was not a perfect man." She paused. "But he kept this, and he kept me close. And in the end," she stopped. "Looked at the city. In the end, he found a way to say what he couldn't say while he was living." Westley looked at the photograph, at the young woman in it, at the baby she was holding. "For the day my son finally knows." He reached out and placed his hand over hers, the hand holding the photograph, and held it there. "I know now," he said. 3 months passed. The estate changed in ways that were small and then weren't. The room at the end of the east wing, the one that had been used for storage since Reginald's time, full of old furniture and boxed files, and the accumulated quiet of years of avoidance, was cleared out in the first week of December. Westley hired a designer, but Nadine came with him to every meeting. She sat in the chair across from the designer's desk and answered questions about what she liked and did not like, with the careful, slightly tentative manner of someone who has not been asked that question very often and is still learning to answer it without apologizing first. She liked light. She liked simple things. She liked a window that faced east so the morning came in early. The designer gave her all 3. She moved in on a Saturday. She did not have many things. 11 years of living lightly had produced a life that fit into a modest number of boxes. Westley carried most of them himself. The young housekeeper, whose name was Brianna, helped without being asked. The groundskeeper, who had left Nadine the last of the good coffee every morning for years, without knowing why he felt compelled to shook her hand at the door of her new room with an expression of profound satisfaction. She stood in the center of the room for a long time after everyone had gone. East-facing window, morning light not yet arrived but promised, simple furniture in warm wood tones, a small bookcase empty waiting. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room and let herself feel without qualification that she was allowed to be in it. It took a while. 11 years of standing in doorways does not reverse itself in an afternoon, but she sat with it and the feeling grew, and by the time the light changed, she had decided she would buy plants for the windowsill. Something that needed tending. Something that would grow. Westley took her to dinner on the last Friday of January. A real restaurant, not a catered event, not a business function, not an occasion with an agenda attached to it. Just dinner. The two of them side by side at a corner table in a quiet place downtown with good lighting and better food. He introduced her to his business partner Darnell, who had come by the table to say hello. "This is my mother," Westley said, simply easily the way you say things when you have practiced them in your mind and discovered they fit perfectly in your mouth. Darnell shook Nadine's hand warmly, said it was wonderful to meet her, said Westley had spoken about her. After he left, Nadine looked at Westley across the table. "You told him about me," she said. I told everyone," he said. "I've been telling people for 3 months. I'm making up for lost time." She ordered the salmon. She laughed at something he said about the breadbasket. She looked sitting there in the warm light of the restaurant with her son across the table, like a woman learning how to take up space in the world, slowly, deliberately, with the particular grace of someone who deserves far more room than they have ever allowed themselves. Elevate Solutions emerged from the 60-day freeze stronger than it had entered it. The story of Reginald's loyalty test and of Wesley's response to it moved through the business community in the way that stories of integrity tend to move, gathering respect as they travel. 3 new contracts came in during February alone. Bernadette Cole was retained on a permanent basis. The secondary login that had been Priscilla's access point was closed, and the entire cloud security architecture was rebuilt from the foundation. Westley did not replace Priscilla. He did not look for anyone. He went to work and came home and sat on the back porch in the evenings, and sometimes Nadine sat with him, and sometimes she didn't, and both were good. He was learning at 34 what his father had tried to tell him in a sealed envelope, that the people worth keeping are not always the ones who announce themselves. Sometimes they are the ones who have been quietly present all along, doing the small, essential work of love without asking you to notice. He was noticing now. There is something this story wants to leave with you. We live in a world that rewards the loud and overlooks the quiet, that celebrates the entrance and forgets the person who has been holding the door open all along, that sees the uniform before it sees the face, and the face before it sees the heart. But there are people in this world, and perhaps you know one, perhaps you are one, who love without demanding to be seen, who protect without asking for credit, who stand in doorways and close doors quietly and leave food on counters and call your name just once, just when you need it most, and then step back into the shadows because they have decided that being near you is enough. It is not enough. See those people, name them, pull them out of the doorway and into the room. Because the truth that this story is really about is that the people nobody notices are often holding the one thing that saves you, and they have been holding it quietly for longer than you know. If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone in your own life who has loved you quietly and deserved more, leave a comment below and tell us about them. We want to hear. This community was built for exactly these stories, exactly these people. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. We have more stories coming, stories about loyalty and truth and the people who show up when it matters. You do not want to miss what comes next. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. That matters more than you know.